Okay, so now that I've confirmed that it's working, welcome to day one trial of screen recording and studying. The purpose of doing this is to remind myself that economics is a very common sense subject and has been glorified a lot. So I don't have a purpose of posting this anywhere. I will just go through. So I don't have a purpose of or intention of posting this anywhere. So I don't think there will be a copyright issue on this if I'm sharing a copy 8th edition of Alvarian. Even if it is, we'll see in future. Anyways, it won't be public, it's just for me. So I'll be covering some of the concepts of the first chapter of market, which is from intermediate macroeconomics. The number one is a few concepts like optimization principle and the difference between optimization principle and equilibrium principle. So the chapter 1 market talks about basically what market is and common sense of demand supply curves and stuff like that. So let's just move on to this is the flowchart that we will be following in the upcoming recordings if I do them. The market and then the budget preferences. So basically the market sets up a tone to understand what kind of a subject this is and what we are trying to learn here in microeconomics basically. If you want my own personal opinion, I would say it's most of the things are redundant now and they are not much in use. I mean, of course, theory is way far away from practice. But we are the new generation and we will sort of build up upon these foundations. So I need my foundations to be very clear if I want to come up with new ideas which are revolutionary and might help in a new generation in a new decade or a new century. Okay. So the first chapter market talks about exogenous and endogenous variables. So these variables are better understood in the sense of learning macroeconomics because it tells you in macro sense that exogenous are variables that you do not have any power on. So these are given to you, okay? These variables are given to you. These are just like a math equation, some of the factors, some of the conditions are given to you. So these are exogenous variables external to you, which you can't change. You do not have a say in them. So they are given to you. Endogenous are the variables that we want to achieve. Okay? And we want to reach, basically. This is, we not really necessarily can change them, but these are the ones that we want to achieve. So it's a journey from exogenous to endogenous, coming from outer to inner. So they've taken for this chapter, Halvarian has taken an example of apartments. So most of his theory and models revolve around, concepts revolve around short run. And I'll tell you what it is and how. Number one is optimization, the difference between optimization and equilibrium. Optimization is a condition that a person wants to achieve. Everyone wants to optimize their living conditions, right? Everyone wants to optimize their situation. If you have, let's suppose, a few things in the fridge and you want to make a food, then you want to optimize all of the materials in the perfect way that the a perfect balance of blend of a recipe or a food comes out. So people try to choose the best patterns of consumption that they can afford. Basically, efficiency, optimization, efficiency are synonymous. Equilibrium is a price situation. Equilibrium is a condition, is like a situation where prices meets demand, where demand and supply are basically equal, and it's a situation of price for me. By definition, it's the situation when the demand quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. And optimization's definition is when people try to choose the best patterns of consumption that they can afford. So these are book definitions. Demand curve. We've all known the demand curve. I was very curious as to why the demand curve is curved like this. Why is it curved outwards and why is it curved? Why is it not a straight line? If you go on Google and you search a simple demand curve, you'll see a straight line, but it's not really necessarily a straight line in real. But we as economists don't really, uh, we live far from reality. Most of the theories with a lot of given constraints. Either ways, um, demand curve. Why is it curved like this? The thing is, there are two things on this axis. There are two axes, and there are two variables on this axis. What are these? I don't think these are called variables. What do you call the ones? I think they are called variables. X and Y are variables, right? So there are two variables on the axis, which is the reservation price and number of apartments. So first of all, I'll explain you the variables. What is reservation price? Reservation price is the price that anybody is the maximum willing price of a person. The maximum a person is willing to pay for a good or a service. And since we are taking an example of apartments, flats, so these are quantity basically on the x-axis. So price is always on the vertical axis. Just to remember, price is never on the below axis, right? Now, why is it shaped like this? If we plot the data points of the reservation price and the number of apartments demanded, you'll see that very less number of people want to pay a huge sum for a less quantity of apartment. And then you would also see that very less people are willing to pay very less amount for a huge number of apartments. But then there are a ton of people who are sane enough to afford and to make a sane decision to and actually have the limits to buy an optimal number of apartments at an optimal number of price. So look at here. This is a very high price of reservation. That means very less people are willing to pay for very, like, let's suppose one apartment, very high price for one apartment. Very, you can find a very less people who would want to do that. Maybe they have an sentimental value attached to that apartment. Maybe there was some celebrity or stuff like that. But in this case, if you would see, this makes sense, right? If you try to make sense out of this, why is it going up again? And why are less people here? The point is, very less people have this kind of uh, less people have this situation that they want to demand a lot of apartments for less price. This sort of makes sense, but it also doesn't. Um, I'm sure there's a mathematical. I'm sure there's a mathematical reasoning behind this as well. There's a mathematical reasoning behind this as well, and I would definitely we'll learn it because we are just building the foundation. So there's no stress in being perfect right now. There was a law of DMU. I learned it in 11th or 12th, I guess, when we were doing microeconomics in school. Whatever, we'll see. But why is it curved like this? Why not a straight line? Why is it curved and why is it not a straight line? Well, if you point a lot of data points, you'll see that a lot of people lie in between. This is the phenomena, right? A lot of people lie in the median, and we have very less number of outliers. So a lot of people lie in the median where they can afford some of it and an optimal number of apartments as well. So this is the way. So we are clear with the reservation price. With short run supply, what is short run? There are two concepts: short run and long run. Short run is basically um, a period of study. Long run is something you involve a lot of conditions. Short run could be 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, but long run is something like your whole life or a century or a decade. I don't know the definition of it. Can we search? Even that is abstract. Most of economics is abstract. Definition of short run and long run. When factors of production are fixed and some are variable. Okay, makes sense. An output can be increased only by the increasing of application of a variable factor. Long run is a theoretical concept in which all markets are in equilibrium and all prices and quantities have fully adjusted. Okay. I'm sorry. Excuse me. So, short run is basically when factors of production are fixed. If factors of production are fixed, then I guess, okay, so this makes sense. Short supply curve is vertical in a short run because you cannot build apartments in a short run. They are fixed. There are a fixed number of apartments and you cannot increase or decrease the number of apartments. It's like a person, a construction builder or a builder sort of is the person built the whole apartment complex, and there are limited number of apartments now. You cannot increase them or you cannot decrease them even if the price increases or decreases in short run. Okay, so we are clear with optimization, equilibrium. We are clear with demand curve. We are clear with reservation price. We are clear with the short run supply curve. Why is it vertical? Let's come on to market equilibrium. So we learned about equilibrium prices where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. This is the equilibrium. Comparative statics, not statistics. Comparative statics is when you compare 2 points of equilibrium. So this situation is supply of apartment increases, the equilibrium price decreases. If you increase the supply, of course the price will reduce. If you decrease the supply, the old demand will shift to new demand. So there was a concept I learned in 11th about movements along the supply and demand curve and shift of demand and supply curve. I will show you this. It's along the demand curves and shift in demand curve. Yes. Let me show you the image. So why does it happen and what's the difference, right? Shift happens due to factors other than price, which could be income, which could be anything else, which could be other variables. But when we talk about price, there's a movement. along the demand curve. Okay, now if you look at this, new supply is created, that means new apartments were built. This has nothing to do with price. This has nothing to do with price. The changing variable was the build building or construction of new apartments, so the price decreased. Now this condition here, this figure says that there were creation of new condos, basically new types of apartments, a penthouse. I don't know what a condo is, anyways. So apartments supply will reduce, and I don't know what a condo is. Is it like an apartment turned into another condo? I have no idea. What is a condo? Condominium is an ownership in which building is divided into multiple units that are either separately owned or owned in common. Okay. So they're commonly owned, basically, combined flats. Okay. So they are combined flats. The number of apartments will reduce. Makes sense. So demand would also reduce. Why would demand reduce? Yeah, demand for the apartments will reduce because some of the people will shift to condos. Okay. Also, a lot of factors are fixed here, like the number of people. What is fixed? Number of people is fixed. So price remains constant. Makes sense. Now we come on to monopoly, discriminating monopolists. We know what a monopoly is when a person is dominated by a single seller. And the market is dominated by a single seller. Discriminating monopolist is the one who favors some person over the other person. And discrimination can happen on a lot of bases. Let's see what they've done. They have done on the basis of highest bidders, which basically states equilibrium. Yeah. Otherwise, there's an ordinary monopolist where he favors some set of people over the other. The supply is constant, demand curve is doing its own thing, and there's a price that the monopolist is charging, which is way above the equilibrium price. And so, since he's charging a lot, the demand is less. Demand is less, and this is the revenue box. The revenue received by the monopolist is just the price times the quantity. Area of the box, which is another way, which is an interesting way to learn area under the curve. Reminds me I also have to do math. Anyways, rent control, I couldn't understand much about rent control. I don't know what happened to my. There was something about tax in the middle that I skipped. Definitely. Yeah, here it is. Let's consider the effect of an apartment tax. Um, Common sense says that if you put a tax on a good or a service, the price will increase and the demand will reduce since the price is increasing. But actually, it does not happen. Let's see why. Suppose each landlord, okay, not the tenant, has to pay $50 a year to the city for each apartment he owns. What will it do to the price of apartments? So, most people like us think that this tax would get passed to the apartment renters, but it does not happen. Rather surprisingly, equilibrium price of apartments will remain unchanged. we have to ask what happens to the demand curve and the supply curve. The supply curve doesn't change because it's short run. Okay. Demand curve doesn't change either, since the number of apartments that will be rented at each different price will be the same as well. If neither the demand curve, a second, what does this mean? And the demand curve doesn't change either, since the number of apartments and that will be rented at each different time will be the same as well. What does this mean? If neither the demand curve nor the supply curve shifts, the price doesn't change. The price can't change as a result of the tax. Before the tax is imposed, each landlord is charging the highest price that he can get that will keep his apartments occupied. P equilibrium is the highest price. They cannot raise the prices. If they could raise the price, then they would have already done so. They were charging maximum price. The landlords have to pay the entire amount of tax. Yeah, this is very interesting. I read this in public economics वाली class में ना, tax वाला scene. इनका कहने का मतलब ये है, लॉजिक ये है कि इक्विलिब्रियम में है मार्केट ऑलरेडी. रियलिटी में ये सब होता नहीं है, ठीक है, ये सब बकचोदी रियलिटी में होती नहीं है, which is why it's so confusing, because it's supposed to be common sense, but because we are living in a hypothetical, we are reading this in a hypothetical situation जहाँ पे हम equilibrium में हैं. That means आपने highest price तो achieve कर लिया. If you raise that price, people, it will not be an equilibrium scene, so you can't. So the landlords have to pay the entire amount of tax. This is the bottom line. The landlords have to pay the entire amount of the tax. Interesting. So we've covered tax. What's left is Pareto inefficiency. Pareto inefficiency को अंडरस्टैंड करने का, समझने का सबसे ईजी और इंटरेस्टिंग तरीका है ordinary monopolists. If you look at this is the equilibrium price, and where this is the equilibrium price basically, where demand and supply meet. But this is the guy, this is the monopolist who is charging here. This is inefficient because he would have earned more in this. ये mathematically prove हो सकता है when we solve the questions. Pareto inefficiency बोलते हैं इसे. I don't know why. There are rules. इकोनॉमिक्स को समझने का बहुत आसान तरीका ये है. सबसे पहले आप समझ लो कि आपका इक्विलिब्रियम स्टेट is your Bible, is your Gita, is your ethics, is your moral, is your first baby step. Okay. उसकी बाहर की दुनिया माचुदा है. बाहर जो हो रहा है उससे हमें कोई फ़र्क पड़ ही नहीं रहा है. तो हम इकोनॉमिक्स में हर चीज़ को इक्विलिब्रियम पे लाने की कोशिश करते हैं. कॉम्पिटिटिव मार्केट में, मोनोपोलिस्ट मार्केट में, ओलिगोपोलिस्ट मार्केट में. और हम किसी भी और चीज़ को, we are so fucking, as humans we are so fucking scared of anything extraordinary or out of ordinary that we deem it to be unnatural. So anything beyond equilibrium is unnatural to us. That's why it's called Pareto inefficiency. मुझे जानना है ये Pareto word का मतलब क्या होता है. Pareto meaning, Pareto principle, known as the 80-20 rule, that 80% of the output from a given situation is determined by 20% of the input. पढ़ूँगी यार मैं ये. There's also a book about 80-20, वो भी पढ़ना है. Either ways, that's what Pareto inefficiency is. Pareto movement, whatever. आगे शब्द लगा दिए इन्होंने बस. There are some price at which both monopolist and renter must be better off. As long as the monopolist doesn't change the price that anybody else pays, the other renters are just well off as they were. In book definitions, is Pareto inefficiency is a situation where some person can be made better off without making someone else worse off. Yeah, this is it. All right. This is for chapter 1. This was the summary, this review questions. We'll do all the questions in one go after the concepts are clear of consumer theory. Thank you for listening to me. This was Prachi Charde. Today is 14 degrees. Today is 11th February, Sunday. Signing out. Bye bye.